Taking an hour out of the noise to think clearly is already a step towards getting that clear-headedness and groundedness that we're going to be talking about today. So before we begin, I'd love to know where you're joining from. Different parts of Israel have been affected differently. Maybe there's some people from overseas as well, which are also affected because of family that is in Israel. And the truth is that while there might be differences based on our location, we are navigating similar pressures at the moment. So for the first part of the session, I'm going to be recording because I'll be sharing some ideas and a framework, and I'd like to be able to share that with people who weren't able to make it. But once we open the conversation, I will stop the recording so that everything we discuss remains private. So what I'd like to start with is a story of something that happened to me a few days ago. I was sitting at my desk trying to focus on something important, some work, and every few minutes something pulled my attention away, whether it was my phone flashing, WhatsApp coming through, maybe let me check email, then I remembered something and I thought, okay, I'll quickly Google it, and I was finding myself very distracted. And then there was this notification for a siren, so then again, another distraction. And as I was dealing with this and really trying to focus on this piece of work that was in front of me, I realized that it wasn't just about being distracted. It was something else. And what I noticed there was that my brain was constantly scanning for certainty. And that's when I began to understand that why am I constantly being distracted by the different messages of this or that, looking up something, forgetting that what I was focusing on and then coming back to it. It looks like distraction, but it's actually trying to get or regain a sense of control. It's trying to understand what is actually happening, trying to get info. And that's when I thought that the hardest part of leading right now isn't only the external situation, which is already quite a big thing to deal with, but I think it's us trying to lead clearly and carry on our life while our own internal clarity is under pressure. And that's really what is happening for us right now. There's a lot of internal pressure, and I want to explore some of that. Because when we're feeling pressure on the inside, most of us go into some form of autopilot, which means that we push harder, we consume more information, maybe we try to control more things, and none of that is wrong. That is just our default way of operating under stress. But if we stay in autopilot too long, our leadership starts to narrow. We start to have this tunnel vision of what we're trying to do and how we're going to get through. And that's really what I want to explore today. How we go from this narrow tunnel vision to broadening it up and feeling like we have more options and more choices. So over the past couple of weeks, I've been speaking with many leaders about the situation and what they're going through, and several themes keep repeating. So here are some of the patterns that I've noticed is that many leaders right now are experiencing things like feeling mentally overloaded, and at the same time feeling emotionally flat or tired. So I think there is the physical tiredness of getting up through the night for sirens, looking for our shelters, together with a lot of things that are pulling at us at the same time, which gives us this feeling of overload. There's sirens, there's family logistics, there's work logistics, there's business, and all of that is pulling at us at the same time, which means that we're mentally overloaded and emotionally flat or tired. There's also a lot of worry about business slowdown and what this means. And at the same time, there are some businesses that are experiencing growth at this time because war becomes an opportunity for them to sell more of their product or services. Many leaders are struggling with focus, decision fatigue. It's very hard to make decisions when you yourself are feeling fatigued and there's so many decisions to make. There's tension between family responsibilities and business demands. And really, how do you run a company when you really are feeling so emotionally, mentally, and physically stretched? So who here can relate to some of these things that I just said? Put up your hand or just use the icon and let's see. Okay, yeah, great. I see there's a lot of resonance. Okay, and feel free to write in the chat as well. So I'm thinking that even in this moment, when we're sitting here in this thinking room, we're making time to think together and gain some knowledge and support. And we're still sitting here between sirens and Slack messages or emails and perhaps, getting calls from home needing us to do something or be somewhere. And most of us are really trying to keep things moving all the time while also managing uncertainty in our whole environment, at home, at work, and in the country and where we're living. So when the environment becomes unstable, we have three key emotions that tend to show up very, very strongly. And those emotions are related to our survival instinct. So what we have here is a lot of loss of control, because we can't always control what we're going to do from minute to minute. We can't control what's going to happen tomorrow. Are businesses going to be allowed to open again? Are schools going back? Are we going to have what to do for our children? Is our team going to be able to come to work? So there's a lot of loss of control. There's a lot of powerlessness and a lot of uncertainty. And if we look at those three emotions, those are three key emotions that tug at our very essence of survival. When we feel loss of control, powerlessness, and uncertainty, our survival instinct kicks in. It activates our survival response, which means the part of our brain responsible for creativity, clarity, strategic thinking, prioritization takes a hit. All those higher executive functions, those all sit in the prefrontal cortex, where when we're in survival mode, that cognitive ability immediately goes down. I always say it's like a seesaw. When our limbic system, which is our emotional survival response, goes up, our cognitive ability goes down. When emotional limbic system goes down, our cognitive, creative brain goes up. And that's how it works. So things that used to feel easy, like focusing, prioritization, and making decisions, suddenly take a lot more effort and energy, and the natural reaction that we often see is to push harder. So if I can't do this now, let me try harder. I'm not able to focus, let me try harder. And then we get distracted and we're somewhere else. And then it creates this vicious cycle where we feel bad about having just spent a bit of time scrolling through news channels or social media. And then we push even harder to focus and we push ourselves to do more. And it creates the cycle of guilt. Why am I not doing more? Why do I keep on getting distracted? And then we push harder because we really want to do something. We want to feel that when we take action, it gives us a sense of control. When we get information from the news channels, it gives us some sense of certainty. So that's why we keep pushing harder and harder to regain control over our emotional and mental well-being. So that's all very good. But here is the leadership risk. When our nervous system is under pressure, we start operating on autopilot. Like I said, when the limbic system, the emotional survival response goes up, cognitive, creativity, prioritization, executive function goes down, and we start to operate on autopilot. And autopilot often feels productive because we launch immediately into let's be busy, let's respond, let's do things. But we're not so much choosing how we lead and what we do. We're on this go, 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 push ourselves further, and we're not doing it very consciously. It's just autopilot taking over and trying to regain a sense of control. And that is exactly what I spoke about earlier, that tunnel vision, narrowing our thinking and thinking we've just got to get this through. It creates impatience. We become impatient with the situation, frustration, and it makes our decisions more reactive than intentional. So then the real question becomes, how do we step out of autopilot and return to conscious leadership, conscious choice, and creative thinking? And that's the framework I want to share with you today. So the framework has 4 steps, and the first step is notice your autopilot. So the thing is, when we go on autopilot, we often don't notice that we're autopilot. We're just doing what we normally do. And each of us has our own default pattern of how we operate under pressure. And it could look very different for one person or another. And for some people, it could be constant activity. Let me just get busy. The busier we are, the more in control we feel. For others, it could be information consumption, constantly checking the news to regain a sense of certainty. And for others, it could be pushing productivity, trying to maintain the same output that we used to before the war, even when conditions have changed. It could be pushing productivity through our teams, and there could be many others. None of these autopilot responses are wrong. We just each have our own pattern and our own way of doing things. And the important thing is to notice it. Notice that you've stepped into autopilot. Remember, with autopilot, less conscious choice, more just operating out of our default. And that might not be helpful. That's our nervous system trying to regulate under pressure. We feel the pressure, our body feels it, and it just steps into what can I do to make it better, to feel more regulated. How can I achieve more of a sense of control? And I'll do this by defaulting to my autopilot response. Now, none of this is conscious. So as I said, we're often not aware of it. So the very first step is to be aware of it. Am I operating from autopilot now? Am I just doing what I always do because this is who I am and this is what I normally do? Or am I taking a minute to pause and see that I'm actually on autopilot? Am I making a conscious choice? Is what I'm doing now really what I want to do? Is this what's really best for this moment, for what matters at this moment? Or am I just operating on autopilot? And that's the question I want to ask you, because when autopilot runs without awareness, that's when your stress compounds. We have this vicious cycle of more autopilot that doesn't always achieve what we want, and then we get more stressed. So that's the first step. The second step is notice how it feels. Once you've noticed your own particular brand of autopilot, ask yourself, how does this actually feel? Do I feel calm, grounded, clear? Or do I feel stretched, stressed, tense, impatient, frustrated? Our body gives us clues. So if we can't name the feeling right now, and again, if we're in the busyness of the autopilot, we're not going to notice it. So we have to stop, notice it, and say, how does it feel? A good clue is to say, what am I feeling in my body? Are my shoulders feeling tight? Do I have this constant headache at the back of my head that doesn't kind of go away? Am I feeling brain fog? Am I feeling a physical fatigue, exhaustion? I think a lot of us are feeling that. So those body signals give you clues. I know my shoulders have been very tight for the last few days, and like every so often I have to remind myself to just take a step back and just do some movement around that so that I don't get into this locked, tense experience in my body. So our bodies often notice the stress before we do and before we can name it. So this is just taking a pause to really say, what am I feeling and what am I feeling and noticing in my body? Then step 3 is asking, what does this reveal about you? You've identified your autopilot pattern. You've identified how this pattern feels for you. And then you want to know, what does this teach me about myself? What does this teach me about how I operate? Because every stress response reveals something about how we operate under pressure. And maybe, as I said, our pattern is jumping into action before prioritizing. Maybe it's consuming more information in order to gain certainty, which blocks decision making because we need to be certain. So we're looking for more and more and more information before we actually make a decision. And sometimes we just can't have all the information. Maybe it's pushing harder than your energy actually allows. So you're exhausted and you're drained and you say, just one more thing and I'll just knock this out, and one more email and one more message and one more report. But what it does do is it highlights what is your pattern. And once we see the pattern, we can then ask the question, is it helping me right now, or is there something that I might need to adjust? You're going to look at that in the next step, which is step 4, making a small shift. This is where your choice returns. So you can't go into step 4 without having done the first 3 steps, because you're just not going to have the emotional and mental bandwidth to actually see it. So you first got to see it before you say, okay, what do I want to do with it? And this is where we look at, what is a small shift that I can make to restore clarity? And here I want to say, I want to go back to the feeling of step 3. If your autopilot pattern makes you feel good, calm, relaxed, some of us could have autopiloted a moment to breathe, a moment to take a walk in the garden and just regain our clarity. Those are great. So if you've got an autopilot pattern that makes you feel good, ask yourself, do I need to do more of that? Do I need to intentionally create those moments in my day? If your autopilot pattern, which often is what happens, increases stress and tension, this is where you say, what is the small shift that I want to make? What is a small shift that will restore my sense of clarity, centeredness, and groundedness? And perhaps it means limiting how often you're going to check the news. Maybe it will mean slowing down a little bit so that you can think and either, if you tend to fire off decisions very quickly, slow down and think, is this a decision I want to make right now? Am I making the right decision? Do I need to take a pause before I decide? Or for some people who don't make decisions, it could be slow down, take a breath. What decision needs to be made right now? Something small that can shift your thinking and your way of being. And maybe it means stepping away for a moment for a reset. Take a moment just to be with yourself and your thoughts. Maybe it's to go for a walk in the garden. Maybe it's to go and get a cup of coffee. Maybe it's to connect with a friend, make a call. So the key is moving from reaction, which is our autopilot response, and back into choice. And even if you'll end up doing the exact same thing, but you've done it from a place of choice, then you're returning your clarity to yourself, your centeredness and your groundedness. So what this framework really does is actually something a little bit deeper. It moves you from being inside the turmoil and chaos and uncertainty and complexity to becoming the observer of the situation, the complexity and the uncertainty. At the moment that you shift into observer mode, perspective returns. And when perspective returns, leadership clarity returns as well. And this is the key thing that I want you to take away, is the awareness of, rather than operating from inside, become the observer, look, and then choose how you are going to act and operate. That gives you that perspective. So, the biggest leadership risk during chaotic periods isn't the chaos itself. It isn't the uncertainty or the specific situation. It's the moment that we stop noticing that we're operating on autopilot. And this is something I really want you to think about for yourself. Look at your past 2 weeks and say, are you able to now recognize some of those moments that we're on autopilot? And the way that you'll notice it is by noticing maybe actions that you regret having taken, things that you regret having said, where you think you could have operated different, because the benefit of hindsight always reflects our autopilot moments to us. And the thing with autopilot is that it's tricky because it can often feel productive, because we're busy, we're responding, we're doing things, and our brain gets those dopamine hits of having done. We can tick off our list and that feels good. But at the same time, we've got to understand that it also narrows our thinking. It shortens our patience and it makes our decisions reactive instead of intentional or even proactive. So we're no longer in that choice space of how we do things. And the moment you notice that, even for a few seconds, your leadership comes back online. So autopilot often shows up as urgency without clarity, when your day is full of activity, but very little of it feels intentional. And I know many of us have a to-do list that is way longer. Even in regular times, our to-do lists are always way longer than we can really do and get through. But I know that in this time seems to somehow stretch and go quickly, in that we can have a plan of what we want to do in a day, but then the day's finished and we didn't even complete half of it, and we think, but how did this day go so quickly? I really feel like I've done nothing. I know I've had that feeling. I've had things set out that I want to do, and I managed to do maybe 1 out of 3, and then I go, but how can it be the end of the day and I've only done one thing? So there is something about that. So noticing that our expectations of what we can achieve in a certain day or in a point of time are very different in a stressful, uncertain wartime situation. And when we can recognize our autopilot moments, then we can move into that conscious space of choice and conscious leadership. So the key thing for me here is not noticing what you're doing and if you're doing it well, but noticing where are you acting from. Are we doing it from our autopilot, or are we doing it from our conscious intention and conscious choice? When you're doing something from panic mode, I need to get things done, I need to feel better, I need to get a sense of control, that's autopilot, versus I'm going to take a break now, I can see that I'm overloaded, I'm taking a 30-minute break, have lunch, take a walk, and then I'll come back and make a decision. Very different place that you're coming from, because where we operate from determines the quality of our decisions, how we communicate, and how we build and grow our relationships, and then of course how we lead and how we achieve what we need to achieve in our businesses. So going back to the framework exercise that I shared with you, what are the 4 steps? 1, notice the autopilot. 2, name the feeling. 3, ask what it reveals about myself. What do I learn about myself and my automated patterns? And 4, make a small shift. What is the small shift that I want to make? It really can take only 2 minutes, but it's got to be 2 focused minutes where you can really go inside and get a sense of those 4 steps. And even doing this once or twice a day can reset your thinking and get you in the habit of taking that observer mode, noticing what's going on, shifting perspective, and choosing the way you want to go forward, which is, where do I want to come from? I want to come from that intentional, conscious leadership place, and that's where I'm going to act out of. So that's the framework I wanted to share with you today. I'd love for you to reflect a little bit and tell me what resonates for you and what would be challenging for you. And I also want to hear what leadership challenge feels most present for you right now. And I'm going to stop the recording very soon so that we can speak freely and maintain the confidentiality. And if anyone's open to it, I actually also want to suggest that we can walk through the framework together. So I'll ask for a volunteer. And just a tip here, if you want to, when you start the framework, the starting point can be, what is a problem that I see that keeps repeating itself in my life, in my relationships, in my work, in my team? And then you can move into the 4 steps of the framework. So we can work together through a real situation. So if each of you now could just think of perhaps a problem that repeats itself, that keeps showing up in your life, something that could show up in different places in different ways, but you know it's the same thing that shows up again and again. That's where we can start from. So just for the recording, before we move into the conversation, I do want to say one more thing, and that is that if this conversation landed well with you and you find yourself feeling stretched or stuck in autopilot during this period, first of all, you're not alone. It's completely normal. This is our nervous system's way of responding to and dealing and coping with stress. And I think most of us are coping in the best way that we can. And a big part of the work that I do is in helping leaders step out of that noise for a moment and see the patterns of how they're operating. Notice those autopilot moments and say, what are the shifts that I want to make? And what are going to be the most powerful shifts for me, so that I can really operate more powerfully in my environment. And really just having someone think with you can make a surprising difference to your level of insight and level of performance. So if at any point you feel that this kind of conversation could be useful for you, you are very welcome to reach out. My door is open, especially at this time. And thank you for taking the time to think today. I'm just going to switch off the recording and I'll just end off with this thought that leadership is easier when we remember that we don't have to do it entirely alone. And that's why I'm so excited about this thinking room where we get to think together, because that really also up levels our thinking quality and our leadership capability.